inhabitants. Today, we're going to be diving into the fascinating world of mermen and their encounters around the British Isles. Amidst the flapping fish, something extraordinary was looking back at them. A man, broad and muscular, yet around the waist, his form was unmistakably aquatic. Now these carvings, some may even be contemporary to the event itself or crafted soon after. There is a haunting song that is being sung by this man. And exhausted from thrashing in the nets, the creature was barely alive when brought aboard. This earned him a reputation as a respectful ladies' man. His interactions with the villagers offer a complex interplay between fear, curiosity, and even empathy. The human head, the human shape, the mouth, doesn't offer a functionable use underwater. It doesn't fit an evolutionary niche to be like that. Practical maritime knowledge, navigation, tide prediction, fishing, through actions rather than speech. He would alert fishermen to approaching storms. He saved them from disaster. He taught a young boy to predict fish migrations by observing wave patterns. Guide lost boats to safety during fog and pointed them towards safe channels, but gestured urgently towards a safer channel. There are a few more dangerous merfolk than the Blue Men of Minch. They would have a battle of the wits. Those who won would be allowed to continue their journey. But the records of these encounters, I don't think we should dismiss them as flights of fancy. Something mysterious was happening in the midst and was recorded as such, and we may be in danger of being a bit reductionist to what may have been genuine encounters with the otherworldly. I was on holiday in Suffolk just last week, and this kind of almost a bit like a diary, really. So I was typing away, looking out the window, looking east towards the North Sea, sunlight shimmering off the wide expanse of water, and there's this kind of unpenetrable universe that exists beneath. There's fish, there's crabs, there's seals that were close to land, and I've always wondered about what mysteries lie beneath the waves. So while away, probably something we all do, is we kind of wonder what Fortean lore, mysterious tales, supernatural stories for the Unearthly Bureau. And so here I am, letting my hair down, enjoying the freedom of the moment, mindful that the week will be over soon. And I thought, what weird stuff is happening where I'm staying? So I was staying at a place called Kessingland, which is in the southeast of Norfolk. Now, apart from a 1967 case of a UFO that allegedly shone light beams down over the beach that zipped away and may have been the same craft seen over Norwich the same evening, there was burial mounds, there was a church going back a millennium, and some scrubland. There was beautiful moonrises, churches with grand history, bury St Edmund's Church here. The truth is, it kind of proved rather benign for the uncanny kind. Nothing really was going on in this area. So I had to travel a little bit to find my Fortean goodness. Now, Rendlesham Forest actually was relatively close, just 10 miles away. But what caught my attention was a little bit further along the beach, was the fishing village of Orford. And this is where we start. So I knew I had a presentation to scribe and put together, building upon the last, each one of my presentations, of which this is now the 10th ASSAP presentation I've done. I wanted something that could captivate and intrigue, and an exploration into something mysterious, lesser known, adding value to subjects that we discuss. And Orford proved the inspiration for this. So from the CE came a title that's supposed to evoke an enigmatic allure of the ocean and its hidden inhabitants. Today, we're going to be diving into the fascinating world of mermen and their encounters around the British Isles, as we are a region steeped in maritime lore and legend. Rugged coastlines, misty shores, and centuries-old fishing traditions have long been a backdrop for tales of sea creatures who blur the line between myth and reality. And in this briefing, we're going to explore some historical accounts, some historical significance, and some enduring mysteries of these mermen, as they are the elusive counterparts, of course, to mermaids. So mermaids have long captured our imagination and have been immortalized as enchanting songstresses of the sea. In folklore, they're often depicted as alluring figures who would use their haunting melodies to lure sailors to their doom, their voices echoing over the stormy waves. Yet, not all tales paint them as dangerous. Some stories speak of mermaids falling in love with sailors, sharing fleeting moments of affection, and then returning to the depths. Their popular culture has shaped our image of these figures from the sea. Mermaids are sometimes glamorous, sometimes otherworldly beings, always portrayed with flowing hair, shimmering scaled tails, seashell bras, and gazing into mirrors with vanity. And this depiction does raise questions. Why is there a single tail of a symbol of allure? Why is that the case? Why are they so different in human form? Why the emphasis on vanity, on mirrors, on combs, when the world is an untamed ocean? Now, these images can be rooted in religious, Victorian art and literature, and often overshadow the more complex, varied roles that mermaids play in folklore. Hans Christian Andersen's The Little Mermaid, or Victorian paintings such as from John William Waterhouse. But the truth is, their male counterparts are a different kettle of fish, and the pun there is intended. They're not generally examined that often. Mermen are overshadowed, and I'm hoping to cast a bit of a fresh perspective on the myths that have shaped our communities for generations. So let's set sail deep into the waters of folklore and uncover the secrets of these aquatic beings. So when you think of a merman, do you think of him as a dashing prince or a weathered sea warrior? And why might that be? So I think seamen, or merman, might not have seashell bras, but they do bring their own brand of oceanic swagger. So let's take ourselves back to the year 1167, deep in the superstitious and tumultuous medieval age, during the reign of King Henry II. This was a time of political upheaval and fervent belief in the supernatural. England was a land of clashing powers at the time. Henry II grappled with Viking descendants, the Danes, clashing also with Thomas Becket, who was the defiant Archbishop of Canterbury, over the authority between who rules the country, between church and the crown. We also have, beyond the royal court, tensions simmering as the Welsh princes clashed with English dominance. The family feuds were tearing at the very fabric of the noble houses of England. Yet amidst these grand struggles, there is a particular tale that emerged from the coastal town of Orford in Suffolk. Now, that is where we're going to start our main story today. So picture a cold, windswept morning in the North Sea, where local fishermen, hardened by years of battling the elements, cast their nets as they have done countless times before. They've hauled their catch, and this time they felt a familiar tug of a full net, heavy with the promise of cod, herring. But this time, the net broke the surface. Amidst the flapping fish, something extraordinary was looking back at them. A man. Or so it seemed at first glance. The fishermen exchanged bewildered looks. How could a man be so far from shore? He was entangled in the net and deep from the icy waters. Their instinct was to rescue the stranger, to pull him aboard and offer aid. But as they grew closer, their curiosity turned to dread. This was no ordinary man. According to the medieval chronicler Ralph of Coggleshall, who recorded the event in his chronicle, the Chronicle Anglarium, the creature had a shaggy beard, wild hair, matted, with skin that was almost beast-like, tough, weathered, and unlike a human's. His upper body resembled a man, broad and muscular, yet around the waist his form was unmistakably aquatic, with fish-like features that shimmered in the dim light. Was this merman a sea spirit, or something more sinister? The fishermen, gripped by fear and superstition, hesitated. In an era where there was a line between the natural and the supernatural that was just razor thin, they saw this creature as an omen, perhaps a warning from the sea itself, and taking no chances, they threw the net back over this strange being on their boat, securing it tightly and hastily returning to Orford's shore, their minds racing with questions. Now, long before the modern mythos of Aquaman, the people of the 12th century Orford gave their own name to this creature. They called him the Wild Man of Orford. This enigmatic half-human, half-fish was no comic book hero. This was a source of awe and fear in this superstitious age. Imagine the scene. The narrow, muddy streets of Orford buzzing with excitement and dread as this wild man was paraded through the town, likely in chains and nets on a cart for all to see. Hundreds of villagers, peasants, merchants, children pushing forward, their eyes wide with curiosity and terror, desperate to catch a glimpse of this fangled creature. Mounted messengers had galloped ahead to Orford Castle, the formidable stone fortress built by King Henry II, to warn the castle's lord Bartholomew de Granville of this monstrous being that is now approaching. This was no ordinary day in Orford. The arrival of the wild man was an event that's now whispered on for generations. Inside the cold, echoing halls of Orford Castle, the wild man was brought before the region's lord. His stern silence unnerved them. His appearance, with his shaggy beard, this wild hair, his beast-like skin, and his fish-like lower body. Where did he come from? Was this a man? Was it a spirit? Or was it something far worse? But this creature remained mute, didn't say anything. Now perhaps he was unable to speak their language, or was choosing silence as his defence. In an era where superstition reigned, and fear quickly took hold, was this wild man a scout for some aquatic enemy, a harbinger of an invasion from the sea? Or worse, was this a devilish creature been sent from the underworld to test their faith? Patience was not a virtue in these turbulent times, and suspicion grew. In a desperate bid to understand the creature's nature, a voice of reason, or perhaps desperation, suggested a different approach. They took him to St. Bartholomew's Church in Orford. Surely, if he was human, or human-like, he would recognise the Lord, the Scriptures, and the sacred power of the Church. The wild man was then led into the dimly lit stone church, surrounded by flickering candles, ornate crosses, and the weight of Christian symbolism. The villagers then watched, expecting to see a sign of reverence, a bow to the altar perhaps, or an acknowledgement of the sacraments. But the wild man only stared, looking around, his eyes looking at very unfamiliar surroundings, crosses, relics, rituals. They held no meaning to him. But to the devout onlookers, this lack of recognition was alarming. If he did not know the cross or the word of God, what is he? Where did he come from? Is he a lost soul, a pagan spirit, or something unholy? Now the tale continues in the Chronicler Agalarium by Ralph of Coggleshall, written in 1200, so it's 33 years after the event. But this preserves the story for posterity. Now, Bartholomew de Granville, the lord of Orford Castle in the area, took charge of the further interrogations. Now, you can imagine this probably involved some harsh methods, including torture. Common at the time when the unknown was often met with harsh methods. Was this creature capable of redemption? Could he be taught the Christian faith and accept salvation? Now, he was held in captivity within the castle's walls. The wild man remained silent, untamed, his origins a mystery. He refused all food that was brought to him, bread, meat, ale, showing no need or interest in human sustenance. Yet when raw fish was brought to him, he consumed it with a ferocious hunger, tearing at it with almost primal intensity. The act only deepened the villagers' unease. Was this a sign of his aquatic nature, or something more sinister? The wild man of Orford, caught between man and myth, left the people of 1167 grappling with questions that would echo through the ages, a testament to the sea and its secrets. If you are living in 1167 and Aquaman's uncle's turned up, he doesn't wear he doesn't have a trident, he doesn't have a superhero cape, just a net and a lot of confused villagers. Now, after weeks of activity, interrogations, failed attempt to unravel the mystery of this wild man of Orford, the story of this sea creature kind of reaches a conclusion. Picture the scene again. This is the rugged Suffolk coast, where the North Sea crashes against the shore, its waves a reminder of the untamed world that lives beyond. The lords of Orford Castle, Bartholomew de Granville, had kept the wild man under close watch, unsure whether this was a marvel, a threat, or something in between, and to test its nature, and perhaps out of curiosity, they allowed him to swim in the local sea, but not without precaution. So a long weighted net was strung across the water, across the bay, on guards stood watch, their eyes fixed at this strange being who seemed more at home on the waves than on land. But the sea, as the people of Orford knew, is a realm that bows to no one. One fateful day, perhaps when the guards were distracted, a sudden storm, their own weary thoughts, the wild man spotted and seized his chance. With a strength and agility that defied his captures, he slipped beneath the heavy net. His fish-like lower body propelled him through the water with uncanny grace. As he broke free into the open sea, Whilst it doesn't say, we could surmise, perhaps with a touch of humour, that he looked back towards the shore as if he gave a farewell to the men of the land who had tried to cage him, perhaps with this gesture right here, that he belonged to the sea and not to the land. I mean, maybe he didn't have fingers that were webbed, but I think his sentiment would have been clear. It said that he looked back, put his arm up towards them, and then dove into the water. So in this broader tapestry of merman encounters across the British Isles, this wild man's tale stands out, not for seduction or song like the mermaids, but for its raw, untamed spirit. The final act of defiance reminds us that the sea, its creatures, will hold secrets beyond their grasp. But if you were on that shore, watching the wild man vanish beneath the waves, how would you feel? Would it be relief, fear, wonder? What was that was in our midst? And our journey with the wild man of Orford does not continue with his escape into the sea. It has left an indelible mark on the people of the land. The tale of this half-human, half-fish creature from the North Sea from 1167 embodies this medieval fascination with the mysteries of the deep. And it would be easy to dismiss this as a mere story, a fleeting fantasy born of superstition and stormy nights. Yet 8 centuries later, this enigmatic figure remains woven into the very fabric of Orford's identity, a testament to the power of folklore, perhaps. Now look around Orford today and you'll see that his presence is etched into stone, into culture. And on this slide here you can see we have carvings and statues that adorn the town, silent tributes to this creature that once captivated the people here. The church fonts at St. Bartholomew's, previously carved during the medieval era, depict this figure, half human, half fish, his form captured in intricate detail, as if to preserve the memory of this extraordinary encounter. Now these carvings, some may even be contemporary to the event itself or crafted soon after, suggest that this wild man was not a passing tale but a story deemed worthy of sacred spaces. Beyond the church, his image appears in unexpected places too, as the walls on local pubs, in the stonework of buildings, even at Orford Castle. So merman-like figures adorn this architecture. And they're not tourist gimmicks. These are made hundreds of years ago, designed to lure visitors with tales of the sea. I think they reflect something a bit more intrinsic, that there's a connection between the maritime heritage and the wild man of Orford. And our book covers too. This one here from Alan Drummond I was reading the other day. Book covers, they keep this legend alive. Modern retellings and historical accounts, such as the one from Ralph of Coggleshall's contemporary version. And there's novels inspired by the sea too. These artifacts show that the wild man is not a relic of 1167, but it's actually a part of their culture itself, a reminder that their mysteries do continue to captivate us. And in the broader mystery of merman encounters in the British Isles, the wild man does stand out. But the truth is, there's a lot more. There's more than one account of something similar to this. This isn't a tale of the one that got away, written by a monk or a scholar. Those who were learned took this account seriously. The carvings made by artisans heard the tale perhaps firsthand, suggestion that it was more than a curiosity, a divine sign perhaps. The fact that some of these statues stand side by side with saints and angels in the church. So we are a nation of legends, as you know. Now, is there a top 10 perhaps of merman in this country? Could there actually be a list? Well, the truth is, there's actually tenfold to that counter of 10. There's much more. We're going to have a tuckle of some of them tonight. So as we move from these wind-swept shores of Orford to the rugged coast of Cumberland, near Cumbria, we encounter another tale of a sea creature. So welcome to Skinburness, a small coastal village near Solway Firth, where around the 13th century, a merman stirred the imaginations of fishermen and villagers alike. Now, this account is said to be recorded in the Lanarkos Chronicle, compiled at the nearby Lanarkos Priory, which is what you can see there, now in its ruin. But it offers a glimpse into a world where sea was a livelihood and an enigma. Picture the scene. The mystery shores of Skinburness, where the tides meet the land in a restless dance. The local fishermen cast in their nets in the shadow of political turmoil. There's Robert the Bruce's raids, struggles with King John's reigns. Yet these people spotted an extraordinary figure that emerged from the waves, and much like the wild man of Orford, this creature had a human face, a human upper body, but the lower half, I quote, was unmistakably from the sea. perhaps shimmering with scales, webbing like the creatures of the deep. But unlike the Orford Merman, who was captured and confined, this was fleeting. It was observed diving and resurfacing on multiple occasions by different people, as if taunting those onlookers with its freedom. The villagers could only speculate to what this actually was. Was it a guardian of the sea, a sign of the divine in this time? Was it a merman? However, the Lanarkos Chronicle is a bit of an odd book, actually. It covers a vast time of history, almost 150 years, from 1201 to 1346, and it's compiled at the Priory. Now, this is a stone's throw away from Skinburness, and that is the source of this tale. However, this chronicle, there is primarily a record of historical events. There's wars, there's royal disputes in there, but there is a weave of a couple of supernatural anecdotes. In fact, in 1216, the story of King Arthur's spirit appearing to the Bishop of Winchester is recorded in this book. Now, the Skinburness Merman, however, is much harder to put down. Now, in my initial search, I came across Hereward Maxwell's 1913 English translation of this chronicle, which actually that archive.org link down there will take you to that. There was a Latin version in 1839, a bit older, but they don't contain the specific account. Of the versions I saw online that talk about this, they all reference this as the source, but in reading the source, I can't find it within. So I think maybe this might be local tradition that's been misallocated to this book. So we shall move on ever so slightly, because I did find an account of a merman connected with this area, but it does come from the Paranormal database. So the year is 1782. Henry Reynolds has reportedly spotted a man off the Cumbrian coast near Skinburness. He initially took it for a pale-skinned teenager and made notes of the strange appearance. The inclusion of brown, waving tail, shorter and thicker arms, with a long, sharp nose, distinguishing it perhaps as a non-human creature. We'll head over here with a man who I attempted today to actually put my hair much like this gentleman, going for the Aquaman look. He went with a blue t-shirt. I've got seashells here. I've got some fossils here, going to bring in the vibe of what we're talking about tonight. But from the misty shores of Skinburness, let me take you to the windswept coast of County Durham, where the port town of Hartlepool harbours another merman tale from medieval folklore. It's a stormy night in rugged Hartlepool's coast, where fishermen, ever watchful chroniclers of the sea, are huddled against the howling wind and crashing waves, when they catch a glimpse of a creature rising from the water. He's a merman. He is a human upper body and a fish lower half. Now, perhaps this is scaled or webbed, and he's sheltering near the shore in the churning sea. He's trying to protect himself from the sea. Now, unlike the Skinburness fleeting account and the captured wild man of Orford, this one appears to be more like the siren myths of old, because there is a haunting song that is being sung by this man. His luring song is echoing across the waves. The sailors are wary of the dangerous rocks that line the coast, believe that this song was meant to entice them to their doom, a perilous melody drawing them in on the jagged embrace of the shore. This merman was never captured. He slipped back into the depths as mysteriously as he appeared, but his presence lingers in the tales amongst the Hartlepool fishermen, passed down orally before being recorded in later accounts. Hartlepool's locals speak of underwater caves that are along the coastline, hidden beneath the cliffs, and that's where this merman might well dwell. An unseen realm mirroring the sea's untamed mystery. The tale is a warning to resist the curious sounds of the sea, because they might lead you to death and dark beaches, and they carry the weight of maritime folklore. This is a cautionary tale against the beauty and the danger. This siren-like merman, unlike the stoic character that we saw before. So County Durham, of course, does have quite a lineage with other merfolk. So in the Norman chapel there, built in 1078 by Saxon stonemasons under Norman rule, there is the oldest known depiction of a merfolk that adorns the column capital. This merfolk character, carved on the south face, boasts this human upper body, flowing hair, the fish-like tail, and possibly clutching a mirror or a comb, symbols of vanity and seduction in medieval Christian art. But such carvings, common in churches, served as moral lessons, warning against the temptation of sin. And much like Hartlepool's Merman's song warned sailors of the sea's danger. There is no specific legend of this carving at Hartlepool's Tale, its presence. This is just a mile off the coast, but it does reflect this cultural fascination with merfolk and resonates with our merman encounters today. So let's move on a little bit further down the coast, where we continue diving into the mystery of the mermen. Now, this count, I quite like this one. Out of all the ones, this is possibly my favourite. The legend of the Skinning Grove Merman, a captivating tale that was first documented in the 16th century in the Cotton manuscripts. They are a remarkable collection of historical documents that are now preserved in the British Library, and you can find them online to read. Now, these manuscripts are a treasure trove into the medieval and the early modern British law, and they provide some of the earliest evidence of this most extraordinary story. The tale was referenced by antiquarian William Camden in his 1610 work Britannia, and there's a comprehensive survey of British geography, history, and folklore. And Camden's accounts lends credibility to this because it situates it in the broader tapestry of the maritime myths. The rugged coastline of Skinner Grove, which is nestled off Yorkshire's northeast coast. Now, it's suggested that this account happened in 1535, although some sources say it might be slightly later. There was an advancing storm that churned from the sea, and this, of course, disrupts the rhythms of the fishing community. But here you may recognise the beats of this encounter. As the fishermen hauled in their nets, they discovered an astonishing creature within. Entangled within was a seaman, this being described as having the upper body of a man and the unmistakable lower half of a fish. Defined their understanding of the natural world, and exhausted from thrashing in the nets, the creature was barely alive when brought aboard. Its eerie shrieks, and it uses the word screeks actually in the original text, and they pierced the air, a sound that left the fishermen in awe of what this actually was. The historical quote says, and it captures the gravity of the moment, "The old man would be loath to have credit cracked by the tale of the stale date. This man was taken by the fishers and was astoundingly different." And once ashore, the merman was brought before the regional leaders. Does that sound familiar? And they faced a moral and practical dilemma. What to do with this otherworldly being? Unable to communicate in human language, this creature was then housed in an old disused building in Skinner Grove, where it was kept for several weeks, or in some accounts months. Described as being a fussy eater, the merman refused all but raw fish, one he devoured with relish, a behaviour that fascinated and perplexed his captors. Now, despite his strange appearance and habits, the merman was actually treated surprisingly courteously, and it became something of a local spectacle, as villagers and curious travellers from afar flocked to see him, turning this quiet village into a hub of intrigue. And most strikingly, the merman displayed a particular fondness for women. As noticed in a historical account, as you can read along the bottom there, fair maidens were welcomest always to his harbour, whom he would beholden to the most earnest countenance, as if his phlegmatic breast had been touched by the spark of love. This earned him a reputation as a respectful ladies' man, and adding a touch of humanity to this enigmatic presence, his interactions with the villagers offer a complex interplay between fear, curiosity, and even empathy, and that defined his encounter. The merman's time came to an abrupt end when his captors, perhaps lulled by routine and growing complacent, seized his chance. The creature fled back to the sea, and when he reached the waves, he paused, raised his shoulders above the water's surface in a gesture that some interpret as gratitude for his courteous treatment. He waved. Now, did he flip the bird like the other guy did? Maybe not. But he did let out a final, haunting shriek before diving into the depths, never to be seen again. And this dramatic escape could be meant to be cementing his legend, leaving the villagers to ponder the mystery of that strange visitor. A fascinating variant of this story, however, is a twist with an extra human emotion. Some accounts claim that the fishermen were actually envious of the merman's attention by local women and conspired to free him. And they allegedly enlisted the assistance of a mermaid whose enchanting song lured him back to the sea. In exchange, the fishermen began a tradition of throwing back the first catch of the day into the water, a practice that is said to be still pertaining in the Skinner Grove fishermen today. Now, the story of the Skinner Grove Merman is deeply rooted also in the Viking era heritage. Of course, the name of Skinner Grove actually is Old Norse for Tanner's Ravine. And this connection underscores the humanity's long-standing relationship with the sea, where fishing was not just a way of life. It was more. It was beyond their livelihood. Tradition, law, story. And William Camden wrote in that 1610 Britannia, suggesting the merman may well have had just been a porpoise, may have been a seal common in the North Sea. But he noted that medieval hunters sometimes dressed as women to approach these animals, a practice that may have been inspired by such tales. And it's interesting, there's a blend of skepticism in his reports as well, to separate myth and the story that I struggle to reconcile this unknown and known at the same time. In 2012, you can see this mural here has been created. An artist called Glynis Johnson collaborated with school children to create this vibrant mosaic that's actually on the Riverside building as a tribute to the Merman, and it serves as a link to the village's storied past, inviting residents and visitors to reflect on that heritage. I think it's interesting here how we are humanizing the Merman, giving him something familiar and something fantastical, making him warm in that community. And I wanted to make a bit of a grouping here, and I'm going to call that grouping teachers. So what we're going to say is teachers from the sea. Now, it's near impossible not to include some notable examples. Here you have Oannes, you have Nereus, Macmillan and Maclear, and even further back in history you have characters like Enki, Nurhastag from ancient Cimmeria. Oannes perhaps is the one I just want to touch on a bit more before we dive back to the UK. So he emerges in the Persian Gulf. Now he imparts wisdom described by the Babylonian priest Beriosos in 3rd century BCE. He has the body of a fish, he has a human head, has feet, but it has a fish-like form. By day, he would rise from the sea to teach Sumerians essential skills. He taught them language of writing, agriculture, architecture, taught them mathematics, taught them law, taught them astronomy. And at night, he would return to the waters, and he was said to be ugly. He was said also to have a terrible smell, a smell of sulfur. Although that might be more hydrogen sulfide, because of course sulfur doesn't smell. So what was he, and where did he return to nightly? And Nereus, who comes to us from the 8th century Greek mythology, was also said to have shape-shifting qualities that we can touch on again. And he was revered for having wisdom, truthfulness. He would talk to people with cryptic messages. Now, he guided Heracles, Homer's Odyssey, Hesiod's Theogony. He taught knowledge of the sea. He taught shipbuilding. He taught people how to read the stars, and he delivered people information. And either directly or through other oracles and messengers. And then you have the character of Macmillan and Maclear, not to be confused with Poseidon, although, of course, they are really, really similar, because they are, of course, both gods of the sea. They mounted golden horses, they moved across the surface of the sea. There's an interesting correlation with their assistants. They dwelled in caves, they created armor, they forged weapons, they forged tools and equipment. They were always depicted as having fish heads, as they wore fish heads to swim underwater, and they were called the Talcini. They were depicted below all the statues of Poseidon around the rim if you were to go to Greece and have a look at the statues of him. Now, oddly enough, the tool that they are most famous for creating was Poseidon's trident, a trishula, sometimes called in India, the tri-spear. And this is a tool that is found with many of the gods. And the leaders possess and pass that tool around, and somehow the abilities then pass around as well. But I'm getting away with myself. Let me tell you about a story of somewhere I went with my son. As you can see here, this is Bamborough Castle. So along the rugged east coast, you'll find Bamborough Castle. Now, Merman was sighted here by fishermen in the 1700s, as noted in regional histories and glimpsed in the form of the travel blog that I did, because basically my son was really eager to go watch the Lost Viking exhibition. Of course, that was based at this castle and filmed here as well. In this legend, there's described as a man-like figure who came from the water, who had flowing green hair, a scaly lower body, and webbed hands, and he was seen swimming alongside boats in calm seas off the Farne Islands. Now, his most striking act was to act as a guardian, a teacher. Now, he gestured towards the horizon before diving deep. He would alert fishermen to approaching storms. He saved them from disaster. And locals later attributed that to him teaching them tidal patterns and what to watch out for. Although this may be a symbolic embellishment, but he also reportedly never spoke, much like the two other chaps. Now, this tale is tied to Banbury's maritime heritage and the tremendous imposing castle. We have this character here. This is the Merrow of Blasket Islands from Irish folklore from the 19th century. A bit broad, as referring to them as a group, but in Irish folklore of the Blasket Islands off County Kerrow, Merrows, which also consist of both mermen and mermaids, were also known for their interactions with coastal communities. One tale describes a merman with a human face, green hair, a fish-like body, who was spotted by fishermen during a moonlit night. But rather than speaking, he taught them through actions, guiding fishermen around safe fishing grounds by swimming ahead of the boats, circling rich shoals of fish. In some versions, he warned them of dangerous currents by creating ripples with his tail. Now, these silent lessons could be also interpreted as gifts of maritime knowledge, teaching locals how to navigate the waters. The Merrow story, also part of Ireland's rich oral tradition, underscores the sea's role as both a provider and teacher in coastal life. This symbolic, non-verbal guidance to fishermen, teaching them practical skills of survival, that intuitive bond between humans and the sea. Do we look to the sea really for lessons of reading weather patterns and respecting nature? And as the next postcard drops there, let's look at the Merman of Port Erin. So in Manx folklore, the island of Man, the Merman of Port Erin was known for aiding fishermen during the 18th century, as recorded in local tales. He is described as being bearded, muscular, with a fish tail, and he would appear during low tide, signalling when herring shoals were gathering, and he would slap the water with his tail, and fishermen knew that this was a response to be made, and they respected the signals that were being prospered, while those who ignored him faced poor catches. So he was teaching these people how to fish, when these things were around. Listen to me, by me slapping my tail, this is a place to come and get to. Now, one tale claims that he taught a young boy to predict fish migrations by observing wave patterns, although this was kept secret from other people. The story persists in Manx oral tradition and is occasionally referenced in local heritage discussions, which is where I found this case. So we have a teaching element here. He taught fish migrations, he taught wave reading skills, and aided directly in fishing. Then you have, as if we go north into Scotland, where we have many myths and legends, fertile grounds for high strangeness. Near Inverness lies Moray Firth. In the 17th century, there are documents from Scottish folklore that cite the cassock man. But this is not just a man. He might have a description that might be a little bit familiar to those listening tonight. A fisherman spotted in the water below, had a human-like upper body, dark seaweed hair, and he would slap the water occasionally, pumping it behind him with a shimmering fishtail. Now, he would lurk near the Cassock Ferry. Now, he was said to guide lost boats to safety during fog and pointed them towards safe channels. He effectively was teaching navigation skills through his actions. One tale claims he saved a ferryman by pushing his boat away from some rocks and then vanished beneath the water. This story persists in local lore, and it is attributed to safe passages thanks to his influence and the knowledge that he gave. He also communicates in silence. He's teaching navigation skills, partaking and building maritime knowledge. Now, this merman reflects Scotland's resilience on coastal waters. This kind of portrays him a bit of a guardian rather than a threat, which is a rarity in these merfolk tales as I've been reading. In Anglesey, now this is coming down to Mike Bembra-Jackson's neck of the woods, his stalking grounds. We have a Welsh tale from Anglesey found in the 19th century folklore collections of Celtic Folklore, Welsh and Manx Volume No. 1 by John Rees, published in 1901. And we owe much to this Anglesey teacher who started logging stories and accounts and folklore of that particular region, bringing together oral tales and writing them down. Now, the Menai Strait is a narrow, tide-swept channel, notorious for strong currents and sudden storms, making it quite fitting for a merman tale. So Puffin Island, as it's currently called in English, with its caves and spiritual associations, is often known as a liminal place, bridging that human world and the other world. And one stormy evening, as recounted by local storyteller Therese, a fisherman found himself in worsening weather near Puffin Island, Yanasiriel, a small inlet at the eastern end of Menai Strait, as the sea churned and the dark clouds signalled an approaching storm. As his boat was tossed by waves, a strange figure emerged from the water. He was a merman. He had a human-like face, long, tangled hair matted with seaweed, and he had a scaly lower body that shimmered like fish scales, and his eyes were described as being deep and knowing. Quote, the merman did not speak, but gestured urgently towards a safer channel, pointing away from the rocky shoals that were below the water, unbeknownst to the people in the boat. The fisherman trusted this creature's guidance and followed the merman's direction, steering his boat along the less turbulent and safer path. This merman swam alongside, occasionally rising to the surface to suggest signal adjustments, really, guiding the fisherman past the rocks into much calmer waters. And as the storm subsided, the merman dove into the depths near Puffin Island's allegedly underwater caves, vanishing without saying a word. And the fishermen were able to return to shore, attributing their survival to this merman's aid. As we go back, returning north, recorded in a book called The Scottish Fairy and Folk Tales in 1901 by George Douglas, the tale of, now it's a Latin word, so it's Olavinitius. Now, I'm probably making a right mess of that. He was a merman and son of a merwoman called Georgia. And the story introduces Ovalventilius, a merman and the son. So in Shetland lore, mermen possess a remarkable ability to transform into selkies. They would don seal skins to seamlessly transition between his coral and his pearl palace and the world above. However, tragedy struck when fishermen from Papastor, they seized him. They seized Olavintilius, stripping him of his precious seal skin, and then confined him to land. Now hope emerged as the selfish actions of Georgia, his devoted mother, known for her compassion. She would carry stranded fishermen across the stranded sea on her back, forging a bond between the men and the mer world. In a poignant exchange, Georgia's heroic efforts paved the way for Ovantilius to reclaim his stolen sealskin, reuniting him with his true form, where he returned with his mother to their enchanted submarine realm. Now, indirectly, this reinforces the idea of maritime respect, not in the strictest sense of explicitly teaching of skills, but I think there's an interesting story that might be hidden within the context of this, and my poor pronunciation of this. So, in folklore, interpretations would assign the selkie to be a metaphor of a shape-shifting motif. A line of thought, perhaps by me, might something else be happening here. If we take this to be a literal, technological perspective to a selkie, the mountable seahorses, are these ancestors using words and language to describe something that they don't have words for, let alone interpretation through languages, regional Celtic, Middle English, Modern English, and so on. They mount on something that allows them to carry people in the same way you see oxes or horses or carts or chariots or a car. Might this be some kind of, ancient jet ski or a submersible that leaves a foam behind in the trail? I don't know, maybe I'm going off on a bit of a tangent there. But she carried fishermen back to shore to retrieve something that her son then puts on that allows him to dive underwater. Maybe I'm seeing this through a little lens, of ancient aliens or something. But this is not a teacher in the Owan sense. But he did indirectly impart knowledge of the sea's rules by demonstrating the importance of returning stolen skins. And this is a recurring motif in Selkie legends. So the seal-like merman can move through the water only when he wears the seal skin, and he's not able to dive underwater without it. A modern lens might say, is that like a scuba gear? Maybe. As staying in the Scottish lands, there are a few more dangerous merfolk than the Blue Men of Minch. The Minch is a vast stretch of water that's found between the Outer Hebrides and Scotland, and they are said to live in underwater caves off the Shean Islands off the coast of Lewis. And their depiction is that of being much closer to humans, but they have blue skin, greying older faces, green white beards with longer arms. They're said to be gruff and strong, weathered by the sea. Their source is a book from 1917 by Donald Alexander Mackenzie, and a book called Folklore and Folk Life. And there's also Gregerson Campbell's Superstitions of the Highlands and Islands from Scotland from 1900. I managed to have a look at one of those earlier today. They appear in the lore to shapeshift, transitioning from being aboard vessels and standing also on the water's edge to also laying in the water when it's calm. They also appear to be creating kelpies. They forge storms to happen when they ride their kelpie. For those familiar with the wider stories of interactions with humans and otherworldly beings, these blue-skinned men would command cryptic duels. They would have a battle of the wits, and those who won would be allowed to continue their journey. But for those who lost, it was a watery grave for the crew. Now, shouting, out rhyming couply, the captain must respond in kind, without hesitation. And the mortal earns the respect of the supernatural that allows him to pass safely. It's an interesting motif that I find replete, certainly throughout the Arab world, certainly throughout the Norse world, and around Britain, where we have supernatural elements that want to talk to humans, but they do so through the form of asking cryptic questions. Make of that what you will. But remarkably, there's actually a record of one such interaction. And I'll read it here in modern English, and it says here, "The Blue Man of the Sea says, 'Hey, man of the black cap, what do you say as your proud ship cleaves through the brine?' The captain responds, 'My speedy ship is here to make the shortest way, and I'll follow you line by line. My men here are eager, and my men are ready to drag you below the waves.' The captain says, 'Good, my ship is speedy, my ship is steady, and if it sank, it will wreck your caves.' To which the Blue Man kind of went, 'All right, okay, no worries, on your way.' Simple interaction as that. But the weather was fair. These Blue Men of Minch were alleged to have been spotted once sleeping just under the surface. Now, one foolhardy group of fishermen also managed to capture one of the Men of the Minch. The strait was calm for a change, and they decided they were going to sneak past these sentries, and seeing one of these legendary spirits lying on top of the waves. And somebody had the terrible idea, to make their name for themselves and go and capture one. They gently wrapped the creature in rope and chain, all they had to spare, and tying it tightly to ensure that he wouldn't escape. But just as they did, two figures then emerged back from under the water, rising back to the surface. "Duncan will be one man," said the first figure. "And Farquhar will be two," replied the second. The calling of his companions woke the prisoner up, and he snapped his bindings as if they were made of thread. Leaping to his feet, he was in no need of help, when the Blue Man then dived overboard, leaving the fisherman terrified at his strength, and with the story then to carry on and to tell. The Blue Men of the Minch, known in Scottish folklore of Nafargarum, the Blue Men. The area known as Stuthnam Figrum, the stream of the Blue Men, as a notorious dangerous waterway with strong currents, whirlpools, and unpredictable weather. Now, I.C. Sedgwick, the folklore blog, and Undiscovered Scotland both reference two other potential possibilities of this. Historical accounts of African captives seen in the Hebrides, dark-skinned individuals shipwrecked, or escaped slaves from passing ships, might be mythologized by local people as being blue-skinned people. Now, I don't know quite how you mix that up, but, maybe. The blue could stem from a misunderstanding of skin tone or poetic exaggeration of the blue hue of their bodies in the water. Another theory suggests that the Blue Men might be related to the Picts. They were an ancient people of Scotland known for painting and tattooing their bodies, sometimes with blue woad dye, as described in Roman sources. speculating that stories of blue-skinned beings might also be memories of Pictish warriors or coastal dwellers, fishermen and raiders. The Picts in Scotland were around until about the 9th century. Now, there is no direct folklore that connects them, but Pictish cultures predate the earliest blue men stories that are around, but they emerge out of Gaelic oral traditions. Although there are distinct parallels. When we spoke about the fact that they speak in riddles, this trickster-like element, this shape-shifting description. And this particular region has had influences of Christianity, of Norse, of Celtic, each casting perspectives, blending accounts of culture. Now, there are no primary historical texts for this, and we may only be reading oral tales through lenses, through filters, but it does feel like there's something tangible to this. So what are my conclusions and thoughts? So as we wind up here, as we're coming up to the 8 o'clock hour, so we're going to wind down here because there has been quite some expansive in writing. So the sources used here for the Orford and the Skilling Grove accounts draw from historical records such as the Ralph of Coggleshall, the Cotton manuscripts of William Camden, the Bamborough, Merman, Cassock, Anglesey, and Port Erin tales come from the Manx archives and the John Rees, and the Shetland story is from the Scottish fairy tale and folklore from 1901, as well as the Scottish folklore and folklife of 1917, and John Campbell's Superstitions of the Highland, as well as the Fisherman and the Merman from Charles Tibbets of 1889. But as you know, I'll be honest, I haven't gone terribly deep into each account. But Merman's characteristics, these British mermen, are consistently described as being half human, half fish, often with beards, wild hair, scaly skin, and emphasizing their hybrid otherworldly nature. And unlike mermaids, who are often seductive, these mermen are portrayed as wild, silent, protective, with a stronger tie to the sea's depths. They're in underwater caves or palaces and protecting. They have teaching roles, explicitly teaching akin to Oan's. This agriculture, this astronomy is rare. However, these mermen found in Cassock, Anglesey, Port Erin are imparting practical maritime knowledge, navigation, tide prediction, fishing, through actions rather than speech. And this, I believe, reflects Britain's coastal communities who valued survival skills over abstract sciences. There's another pattern also that I noticed just from these accounts alone when I was aligning them up or which way I would read them, is that you can kind of look at them as regional themes. The regional patterns, the English merman in these accounts, the Orford and the Skilling Grove one, they were captured. They also highlighted humans' curiosity, the sea elusiveness. The Scottish merman of Cassock and Shetland blend guidance with this Selkie-like transformation. They're tied to the North Sea lore. And in the case of the Blue Men, they have that trickster ability, that shape-shifting ability. The Welsh and Manx mermen from Anglesey and Port Erin were protectors. They aligned with typical Celtic water spirit traditions. In the historic context, medieval accounts, they reflect Kristian views of merfolk as marvels or demons, while later tales, the Skilling Grove one from the 18th century, humanises them, possibly influenced by the Enlightenment, that curiosity that happened after that, and modern retellings of all these kind of emphasise cultural heritage, such as the mosaic that's happening in Skilling Grove, for instance. In the comparison to mermaids, mermen are far less common and less prevalent in British folklore. There's far fewer romantic or tragic narratives. Their stories focus on maritime utility, escape, reflecting male-coded roles of guides or wild beings rather than an enchantress. It's a challenge not to go with data, though, and I struggle with dividing them into different categories as these accounts occur with no premeditation. Those involved come across the merman, and it's kind of following its actions. They're kind of just dealing with what is happening. So placing them as kind of folkloric allegories or moral tales is different here. And I think when we do that, I think it lowers them to simplistic narratives, to who they were. Something mysterious was happening in the midst and was recorded as such. And there's been many different lenses, applied interpretations, and we may be in danger of being a bit reductionist to what may have been genuine encounters with the otherworldly. So our merfolk real, and my lovely friend Claire, who I believe joined us here tonight a little bit later, who I invited here to say thank you very much for joining. She's living her best life in the waves. She cosplays and lives the way of the mermaid and in her comfort zone in the stormy seas. Now, is it true there is any evidence to support the existence of merfolk as a real species, however? Now, from a scientific perspective, Aquatic humanoids don't quite fit any evolutionary niche. Mammals like seals and manatees, which share traits of intelligence, and even the humanoid silhouettes in water, may have inspired the sailors and the fishermen to tell tall tales. But there is a distinct sense of humans' fascination with the sea as an unreachable realm, the wonder of wanting to be in a place where we can't go. That is part of human psychology, that we want to project ourselves to be there, to be everywhere, underwater, in space, for instance. These tales, like the Blue Men of the Minch, would explain natural phenomena, storms, shipwrecks, embodying cultural values, warnings from the sea's danger. I don't think we should dismiss the accounts as being invalid. I think they do provide a psychological or cultural insight, while not necessarily being literal. The fishermen's stories of the ones who got away or rescued by aquatic beings may stem from misinterpretations, oral traditions, and the human tendency to anthropomorphize. But the records of these encounters, I don't think we should dismiss them as flights of fancy. We might be missing a crucial perspective here to say, well, there's nothing to see here. We know fishermen tell stories. It's the one that got away. But maybe someone's one that got away was a true story. And we should carry on looking with wonder in our heart. And that excitable part of my mind is always inspired by stories like this. Now, I want to juggle my wonder mind with my skeptical mind, but I kind of want to border that by being a rational journalist first. And it's boring, I know, but I'm generally fascinated by tales of the weird and the wonderful, and I think how they inspire us. And this will draw my talk tonight to a close. Thank you very much. My name is Kristian, and this is my socials here. You can find me on YouTube, on Facebook, and on X, and then my website is kristianlander.com. Thank you very much for listening to me here today. Ramble away and with my shaggy hair and my seashells and my fossils.